Hello, welcome. We're going to read more of Evelyn Underhill's Mysticism from 1910. This book is, and it's a study of the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. So how people develop their spiritual consciousness. It's quite like an academic book, but there's so much beauty in this. And she inspired C.S. Lewis, and I think Tolkien, because Tolkien was friends with Lewis, and they met all the time together and spoke about spiritual books. She was a contemporary or a little bit before them, right? And I got up here in nature for us so we have a good view. I like giving us a good view when I can, when I'm reading this, so you guys have something dynamic to look at. I think I'll turn the camera around. My name is Dr. Cheryl Meyer. I am a psychologist for the last 20 plus years. Before that, it took me 9 years to get through college and graduate school. So almost 30 years, I'd say 30 years of studying this professionally, not just as a hobby. And I went to a school that integrated a spiritual path or a spiritual tradition, if you want to understand Christianity. But I think my grandparents were Jewish. I'm part Native American. And I love Bob Marley, and so I always welcome people of all religions, and that's why I'm studying this, so we can look at it from a deeper perspective and understand just where all people are. And there's going to be bikers behind me because I'm on a bike path. All right, let me put this in, and we're off. Welcome. You can subscribe to my channel and share this with other like-minded people, and go to the playlists if you want to go to the beginning, but you're always welcome to start here. I think starting now, wherever you got this, is a great place to start, or start at the beginning, and you can rewatch these because there's so much depth in this book. I'm just amazed by it. I was going to read it by myself, and then I just figured I'd read it to you guys so that, because I couldn't find it anywhere. I like getting audible books so that I can listen when I'm on my trails walking, or when I'm taking my kids places and stuff like that, unless I get them captive and I get to talk to them, in the car about deep things or little small things. Let me do this. All right. Okay. So welcome. All right. I hope this didn't fall out. I thought we were at the beginning of chapter 3. We read some of it. I was in San Francisco, and I read from San Francisco under the bridge. So not under, under a bridge. Not like directly under it. It was a good view. It wasn't the bridge, but all right, I'm gonna read a little bit like this, and then I'll show you. Let me show you the view now. I can have this on the view, because it's gonna be sunset soon. Even though there's clouds, it's just so dynamic and pretty. There. Okay. So I think we are at the bottom of this page right here. The restful laboring, said Walter Hilton, is full far from fleshly idleness and from blind security. It is full of spiritual working, but it is called rest. For that grace looseth the heavy yoke of fleshly love from the soul. Oh, here, let me say for a second, if you guys are joining me right now, all right, you can get the free PDF. I think I leave the link in all the description. Yeah, because it's free online, because it's over 100 years old. This is chapter 3, Mysticism and Psychology. And in the last video, I talked about all of the parts that are going to be in this book. In this chapter, she talks about mental machinery, emotion, intellect, will, their demand of absolute objects, cognation and cognition, action and thought, the importance of emotion, love and will, concentration, contemplation, the mystic sense, its liberation, passivity, the mystic state, things like that. We'll just talk about them. So, quote, this restful laboring, said Walter Hilton, is far from fleshly idleness and from blind security. It is full of spiritual working, but it is called rest. For that grace looseth the heavy yoke of fleshly love from the soul, and maketh it mighty and free through the gift of spiritual love, for to work gladly, softly, and delectably. Therefore it is called a holy idleness, and a rest most busy, and so it is in regard of stillness from the great crying of the from the great crying of the beastly noise of fleshly desires. Okay, so it's rest and busyness at the same time. All right. If those who have cultivated this latent power be correct in their statements, the self was mistaken in supposing herself to be entirely shut off from the true external universe. She has, it seems, certain tentacles which, once she learns to uncurl them, will stretch sensitive fingers far beyond that limiting envelope in which her normal consciousness is contained, and obtain data from which she can construct a higher reality than that which can be deduced from the reports of the senses. We'll get the rhythm of what she's talking about. The fully educated and completely conscious human soul can open then, as an anemone does in the ocean. An anemone, is that what it is? An anemone. I haven't said that word in so long. Leia, it's okay. I brought the dog. All right, let me. There, that's pretty. Like a sea anemone opening. All right. What is it, little? Gotcha. Oh, I forgot she's right on the mic. Okay. And know the ocean in which she is bathed. This act, this condition of consciousness in which barriers are obliterated, the absolute flows in on us, and we, rushing out to its embrace, find and feel the infinite above all reason and above all knowledge. It is the true mystic state. The value of contemplation is that it tends to produce this state and turns the lower servitude, in which the natural man lives under the sway of his earthly environment, to the higher servitude of fully conscious dependence on that reality in whom we live and move and have our being. That's a verse. God, in whom we live and move and have our being. So it's like the sea anemone that opens up into that. Oh, I wish you could see the sunset right there where that orange is. But it's kind of blocked. I'll let you see a second of it. It's just blocked from where I am. What then, we ask, is the nature of this special sense, this transcendental consciousness, and how does contemplation liberate it? Any attempt to answer this question brings upon the scene another aspect of man's psychic life, an aspect which is of paramount importance to the student of the mystic type. We have received the chief aspects under which the normal self reacts upon experience by means of its surface consciousness. a consciousness which has been trained through long ages to deal with those concrete matters which make up the universe of sense. We know, however, that the personality of man is a hi. You made it. That the personality of man. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell in the microphone, guys. We have reviewed the chief aspects under which the normal self reacts upon experience by means of its surface consciousness, a consciousness which has been trained through long ages to deal with those concrete matters which make up the universe of sense. We know, however, that the personality of man is a far deeper and more mysterious thing than the sum of his conscious feeling, thought, and will. That this superficial self, this ego, of which each of us is aware, hardly counts in comparison with those deeps of being which it hides. There is a root of depth in thee, says Law, from whence all these faculties come forth as lines from a center, or as branches from the body of a tree. This depth is called the center, the fund or bottom of the soul. This depth is the unity, the eternity. I had almost said the infinity of thy soul. For it is so infinite that nothing can satisfy it or give it any rest but the infinity of God. Oh, I wonder if that's St. Augustine. Oh, look. That's... Law. A guy named Law was the capital L-A-W. That's why I was wondering. It's from The Spirit of Prayer, Liberal and Mystical Writings of William Law, page 14, if you want to look that up. But Augustine said something simply similar to that. Our hearts are restless until they find their repose in thee. Since normal man, by means of his feeling, thought, and will, is utterly unable to set up relations with spiritual reality, it is clearly in this depth of being, in these unplumbed levels of personality, that we must search if we would find the organ, the power by which he is to achieve the mystic quest. That alteration of consciousness which takes place in contemplation can only mean the emergence from this fund or bottom of the soul of some faculty which dineural life keeps hidden in the deeps. So normal, she's just saying normal life keeps these things hidden from us. We don't, in our normal life, we're not connected to these. We have to get into a deep contemplation. And that takes patience and willingness and, your understanding that you have a desire for this. And, some people have different paths in this lifetime of theirs. And so not everyone goes there, but then it's not for them to start making fun of the mystic. It reminds me, anyway, there's a J.J. Abrams TV show. I usually don't date any of my videos, so they could be around for hundreds of years. But there is a J.J. Abrams TV show where these computer-like guys come, and they think everybody ought to have no emotions, but then, like, spoiler alert, towards the end, they see that someone has this depth of emotion and thought and will, and it supersedes all of the really intellectual people, big brain people, by 1,000, by like so much. I mean, you can't even quantify it. Anyway, that's just coming to mind for this. Our normal life keeps this hidden. Modern psychology has summed up man's hiddenness in that doctrine of the subconscious or subliminal personality, which looms so large in recent apologetic literature. It has so dwelt upon and defined this vague and shadowy region, which is really less a region than a useful name, that it sometimes seems to know more about the subconscious than about the conscious life of man. There it finds side by side the sources of his most animal instincts, his least explicable powers, his most spiritual intuitions, the ape and tiger, and the soul. You see, like Freud talked about the id, and I was just talking with one of my clients this morning, saying the id, I was taught it's like it's not just your impulses, but it's this energy force, this power within you. That's one way to describe it. But anyway, So it's not, anyway. Genius and prophecy, table turning and clairvoyance, hypnotism, hysteria, and, quote, Christian science are all explained by the subconscious mind. They just put it in this category of subconscious mind. In its pious and apologetic moods, it has told us ad nauseum that, quote, God speaks to man in the subconsciousness. And that's in Cutten, C-U-T-T-E, and Psychological Phenomena of Christianity. And has succeeded in making the subliminal self into the Mesopotamia of liberal Christianity. The result is that popular psychology tends more and more to personify and exalt the subconscious, forgetting the salutary warning administered by a living writer when he told us that man has not only a shadowy companion, but a muddy companion, too. It represents the subliminal self as an imprisoned angel, a mystic creature possessed of supernatural powers. Stevenson was far more scientific when he described the subconscious personality of Dr. Jekyll as being Mr. Hyde, for the subconsciousness is simply the aggregate of those powers, parts, or qualities of the whole self which at any given moment are not conscious, or that the ego is not conscious of. The ego with a capital E, not egotism. E-G-O means self in Greek. Included in the subconscious region of an average healthy man or woman, are all those automatic activities by which the life of the body is carried on, all those uncivilized instincts, quote, uncivilized, and vices, those remains of the ancestral savage which education has forced out of the stream of consciousness, all those aspirations for which the busy life of the world leaves no place. Hence, in normal man, the best and worst, the most savage and most spiritual parts of the character are bottled up, quote, below the threshold. Often the partisans of the subconscious forget to mention this. It follows then that whilst we shall find it convenient and indeed necessary to avail ourselves of the symbols and diagrams of psychology in tracking out the mystic way, we must not forget the large and vague significance which attaches to these symbols or allows ourselves to use the subconscious as the equivalent of man's transcendental sense. It's not the same, right? Here the old mystics, I think, displayed a more scientific spirit, a more delicate power of analysis than the new psychologists. They too were aware that in normal men the spiritual sense lies below the threshold of consciousness. Though they had not at their command the astonishing spatial metaphors of the modern school and could not describe man's ascent toward God in those picturesque terms of paths and levels, uprushes, margins, and fields, which now come so naturally to investigators of the spiritual life, they leave us in no doubt. Oh God, I'm sorry. Dear God. I was just hoping that wasn't a coyote all of a sudden, Hey, it's okay. It's a big white dog. It's a big dog, though. I'm sitting down, so I'm not in a... Sorry, I was like literally praying. God. Wow. Maybe I'll sit up on the bench so I'm a little higher, not on the ground. That made my heart go. Like, dogs aren't really meant to be up here, but it's only 8 feet off the path or so, or I don't know how many feet, 8 yards. So, but definitely on a leash. But whatever, okay. Bear with me. So let's talk about what she was just saying for a second. We might as well, while we're moving this. Yeah, it's below the normal conscious mind or above it. I like how Eckhart Tolle described it, the guy that wrote The Power of Now. He described it, he said, he tried some kind of substance. I won't say, because there might be kids listening and stuff, which is fine. I welcome all ages. But he says that thing took him below consciousness. It helped him turn his brain off, his mind off. but it didn't raise him above consciousness. But below. And so when you actually learn how to quiet your mind, you can stop letting your mind dictate everything, and you're so caught up in the ebb and flow of all of life, and you actually you're not using something else to do that. Let's just relax. You can look at the scenery for a second or just fast forward a couple minutes. Sorry about the interruption. This is just, I don't have a whole production team and everything all perfect here. It just, we're getting through the book because we love learning, and I can't always control what happens, and I have kids and my professional life and everything, so I don't have the means to sit and edit all these, so I just try to make it as seamless as possible. Leia. All right. I have her leash on my leg. We're good. Leia, you're getting up here again. Come here. One second. I gotta put the... Oh. Okay. Good girl. Good girl. Sit. Sit. Good girl. I hope I didn't scream too loud in the mic. It follows then that we shall find it convenient and indeed necessary to avail ourselves okay, we already read that part. Yeah, I got you. Here the old mystics, I think, though they had not at their command the astonishing spatial metaphors of the modern school, okay, we read that. Further, man's spiritual history primarily meant for them, as it means for us, the emergence of this transcendental sense from its prison, its capture of the field of consciousness, and the opening up just a second. Of those paths which permit the inflow of a larger spiritual life, the perception of a higher reality. This, insofar as it was an isolated act, was contemplation. When it was part of the general life process and permanent, they called it the new birth, which, quote, maketh alive. The faculty or personality concerned in the new birth, the, quote, spiritual man. You know how Jesus said, you must be born again, when Nicodemus asked him, how can I inherit eternal life? And so they called it a new birth. I'm going to turn it. Maybe we can get the sunset from here. The faculty or personality concerned in the, quote, new birth, the spiritual man, capable of the spiritual vision and life, which was disassociated from the earthly man adapted only to the natural, the earthly man's adapted only to the natural life, was always distinguished by them very sharply from the total personality, conscious or subconscious. It was something definite, a bit or spot of man which belongeth not to time but to eternity, was different in kind from the rest of his human nature, framed in all respects to meet the demands of the merely natural world. The busyness of the mystic in the eyes of these old specialists was to remake, transmute his total personality in the interest of his spiritual self, to bring it out of the hiddenness and unify himself about it as a center, then, quote, putting on divine humanity. Like I have my bookmark again, rose, which I saw in a meditation meant rise, open your soul eyes. One of the first people, it was the first person in my life that ever died. I was thinking of her this morning. Her name was Rose. And I was like 14 or 15 and I cried for like a week. But anyway, it is interesting to note that the most recent teaching of Rudolf Eucken, E-U-C-K-E-N, is in this respect a pure and practical mysticism, though his conclusions have not been reached by the mystic's road. The redemptive remaking of personality, it's the, quote, redemptive remaking of personality in conformity with the transcendent or spiritual life of the universe, is for him the central necessity of human life. The life of reality, he says, is spiritual and heroic, an act, not a thought. An act, not a thought. This is, our spiritual life is heroic. It's an act, not a thought, right? This is a heroic act, if you will, right now, that we're engaging in right now, for this book to be read among all the circumstances I've had to face to get here tonight, this evening at sunset. And you have perhaps just to turn it on. Oh, shoot. The wind just blew. All right. Okay, so it's a heroic act. One second, okay, I have the new birth. Sit, Leia, sit. Her name is Princess Leia. The redemptive remaking of personality. The redemptive remaking of personality, in conformity with the transcendent of spiritual life of the universe, is for him the central necessity of human life. The life of reality, he says, is spiritual and heroic, an act, not a thought. Further, Eucken, like the mystics, declares that there is a definite transcendental principle in man. He calls it the Gemuth, G-E-M-U-T-H, and it's like the German word with the U with the two dots on top. The heart or core of personality. And there, he says, God and man initially meet. He invites us, as we have seen, to distinguish in man two separate grades of being, the narrower and the larger life, the life that is straitened and finite and can never transcend itself, and an infinite life through which he enjoys communion with the immensity and the truth of the universe. At bottom, all the books of the mystics tell us no more and no less, but their practical instructions in the art of self-transcendence, by which man may appropriate that infinite life, far excel those of the philosopher in lucidity and exactness. At the bottom, all the books of the mystics tell us no more and no less, but their practical instructions in the art of self-transcendence, by which man may appropriate that infinite life. They far excel those of the philosopher in lucidity and exactness. The divine nucleus, the point of contact between man's life and the divine life in which it is immersed and sustained, has been given many names in course of the development of mystical doctrine. All clearly mean the same thing, though emphasizing different aspects of its life. Sometimes it is called the centresis, the keeper or preserver of his being, sometimes the spark of the soul, the Funklein, Funklein, of the German mystics, sometimes its apex, the point at which it touches the heavens. Then, with a sudden flight to the other end of the symbolic scale, in order to emphasize its oneness with pure being, rather than its difference from mere nature, it is called the ground of the soul, the foundation or basal stuff. Basal, the base, stuff whence springs all spiritual life. Clearly, all these guesses and suggestions aim at one goal and are to be understood in a purely symbolic sense. For as Malavel observed in answer to his disciples' anxious inquiries on this subject, quote, since the soul of man is a spiritual thing and thus cannot have divisions or parts, consequently it cannot have height or depth, summit or surface. But because we judge spiritual things by the help of material things, since we know these better and they are more familiar to us, we call the highest of all forms of conception the summit, and the easier way of comprehending things the surface of the understanding. All right. Here, at any rate, whatever name we may choose to give it, is the organ of man's spiritual consciousness, the place where he meets the absolute, the germ of his real life. Here is the seat of that deep transcendental feeling, the beginning and end of metaphysics, which, it says Professor Stewart, at once the solemn sense of the timeless being and of that which was and is and ever shall be, overshadowing us, and the conviction that life is good. I hold, says the same writer, that it is the transcendental feeling manifested normally as faith in the value of life, and ecstatically as sense of timeless being, and not in thought proceeding by way of speculative construction, that consciousness comes nearest to the object of metaphysics, ultimate reality. That it is that is in transcendental feeling manifested normally as faith in the value of life, and ecstatically as sense of timeless being, and not in thought proceeding by way of speculative construction, that consciousness, with a capital C, comes nearest to the object of metaphysics, ultimate reality. The existence of such a sense, such an integral part or function of the complete human being, has been affirmed and dwelt upon not only by the mystics, but by seers and teachers of all times and creeds, by Egypt, Greece, and India, the poets, the fakirs, the philosophers, and the saints. A belief in its actuality is the pivot of the Christian position, the foundation and justification of mysticism, asceticism, the whole machinery of the self-renouncing life. That there is an extreme point at which man's nature touches the absolute, that his ground or substance, his true being, is penetrated by the divine life which constitutes the underlying reality of things. This is the basis on which the whole mystic claim of possible union with God must rest. Here they say it is our link with reality, and in this place alone can be celebrated the marriage from which the Lord comes. That's Tauler's sermon on St. Augustine, The Inner Way, page 162, Tauler anyway. To use another of their diagrams, it is thanks to the existence within him of this immortal spark from the central fire that man is implicitly a, quote, child of the infinite. The mystic way must therefore be a life, a discipline, which will so alter the constituents of his mental life as to include this spark within the conscious field, bring it out of the hiddenness from those deep levels where it sustains and guides his normal existence, and make it the dominant element round which his personality is arranged. This revolution in which this is effected begins with the new birth, which has been described under other terms by Rudolf Eucken as the indispensable preliminary of an, quote, independent spiritual life and man. I talk about this in the book The New Man that I read by Maurice Nicole. I really thought about it today. It came up today just so you can understand a context for what she's talking about. It's like in Lent, there's a discipline of Lent where people take 40 days to fast from something or from some things. And in the time when they're fasting, they add in other disciplines. They add in prayer. And there are these disciplines, I won't say what, that I added in during that time, during that 40 days. But it ended up that I grew my soul was so fed by those disciplines that I kept keeping those in. It's like there's so many spiritual disciplines sometimes that it's like, well, where's normal life, like work and everything else that needs to get, quote, done, But your whole ground of being begins to center around a different object. It's kind of like in a movie, I won't say which, there's wolves and other people, and they imprint on a certain person, and they said their whole world goes to that thing being the center. And of course, that's the first commandment, is let God be that first center, But as a mystic, I loved that idea of everything all of a sudden surrounding that. It's what happens in mysticism, in our surrender to the divine love and divine order and divine the will. Thy will be done on earth. We were made out of earth, on earth, as it is in heaven. Well, out of God and out of earth, Now it is clear that under ordinary conditions, and save for sudden gusts of the transcendental feeling, induced by some saving madness such as religion, art, or love, the superficial self knows nothing of the attitude of this silent watcher, this, quote, dweller in the innermost. Your superficial life doesn't know this. This is why the people that are living a superficial life think you're crazy and make fun of you and think, you're taking out all of the good stuff out of life. What are you doing? You're being an ascetic. You're cutting out this social life you could be having, or you're cutting out this or that. And it doesn't understand. I'm getting my light for when I need it in a couple of minutes. The superficial self knows nothing of the attitude of this silent watcher, this, quote, dweller in the innermost, towards the incoming messages of the external world, nor the activities which they awake in it. Wholly taken up by the sense world and the messages she receives from it, she knows nothing of the relations which exist between this subject and the unattainable object of all thought. Object is capital O. But by a deliberate inattention to the messages of the senses, such as that which is induced by contemplation, the mystic brings the ground of the soul, the seat of transcendental feeling, within the area of consciousness, making it amenable to the activity of the will. Okay, so she's describing how you get these mystic understandings. How you get a mystic view. You have to it's like what I was just describing. So Lent was a just easy way to describe it. It's like when you give up something, like let's say you give up chocolate or you give up TV or social media or whatever, you're fasting from that. You're taking that away from your senses. Your senses are used to being fed by that thing, and you're taking that away. And in its place, you're adding this quietness or whatever. And by withdrawing the energy, you can't fight the outer world, but by withdrawing the energy from the ebb and flow of life, you then have the focus power, the possibility of looking into your inner man, your inner woman, your innermost self. It's beyond man and woman. The contemplative subject, becoming aware of his usual and largely fictitious, quote, external world, and another more substantial set of perceptions, which never have their chance under normal conditions, rise to the surface. Sometimes these unite with the normal reasoning faculties. More often they supersede them. Some such exchange, such, quote, losing to find, I was lost and then I found. I have to lose this one thing in order to find that. I have to let go of all these parties to spend time with my one true love type of thing, You let go of holding on to all of your senses and depending on that to tell you everything, to get to your inner sense. Just to find your inner sense and your innocence. It's like that. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, right? Some such exchange, such as losing to find, appears to be necessary if man's transcendental powers are to have their full chance. The two eyes of the soul of man, says the Theological Germanica, in an apt and vigorous metaphor, cannot both perform their work at once. But if the soul shall see with the right eye into eternity, then the left eye must close itself and refrain from working, and be as though it were dead. Jesus said that. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It's better to go into heaven with one eye. He's talking about higher consciousness, way deeper things, It's like your left brain is your logical brain. Your right is your artistic brain. And so it's like I learned to draw this drawing. I used to have it in my wallet, but I just gave away my card. It's on my card. A Van Gogh drawing. And it's called At Eternity's Gate, so it looks just like his. And it was like my third drawing I'd ever done, because this book taught me to turn it upside down, turn his drawing upside down, turn my sketchbook upside down, and start drawing from that. And then you go into these profound spaces that I didn't know I had artistic ability. And so, but if the soul shall see with the right eye into eternity, then the left eye must close itself and refrain from working and be as though it were dead. It's just like Mary and Martha. Mary sat by Jesus' feet while Martha was working at the time. And Mary chose the better thing in that moment. For if the left eye be fulfilling its office toward outward things, that is, holding converse with time and the creatures, then must the right eye be hindered in its working, that is, in its contemplation. Therefore, whosoever will have the one must let the other go, for, quote, no man can serve two masters. Oh, hi. Hello. She's fierce, right? I'm glad you're here, though. There is, hey, shh, the big white dog is back. There is within us an immense capacity for perception, for the receiving of messages from outside, and a very little consciousness which deals with them. Sit, Leia, sit. Sit. Leia, it's okay. It's okay. We're not at home. Shh. Hey, 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 hey. Shh. Leia. Oh, she's wagging her tail. Sit, sit. Good girl, sit. Sit. Good girl. Shh. 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 I got her. Thanks. Shh. There is within us an immense capacity for perception, for the receiving of messages from outside, and a very little consciousness which deals with them. It is as if one telegraph operator were placed in charge of a multitude of lines. All may be in action, but he can only attend to one at a time. In popular language, there is not enough consciousness to go round. Even upon the sensual plane, no one can be aware of more than a few things at once. You can't, it's like pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time and, tickle your feet. It's like you can't be aware of all of that at once sometimes. I know, because I gave birth. And anyway, no one can be aware of more than a few things at once. These fill the center of our field of consciousness, as the object on which we happen to have focused our vision dominates our field of sight. The other matters within that field retreat to the margin. We know dimly that they are there, but we pay them no attention, and should hardly miss them if they cease to exist. Transcendental matters are, for most of us, always beyond the margin, because most of us have given up our whole consciousness to the occupation of the senses. We're always caught up in the senses, like everything that's going around here tonight. That kid, like I could cry right now if I gave over to my senses with how many interruptions and all this stuff, because I'm such a perfectionist. Like I want this to just be all reading and all explanation, but it just is what it is, and you have to let go of that if you want this contemplative life. Like I encourage you, as I am persevering, I encourage you to persevere in this video. These fill the center. Okay, so we know dimly that they are there, but we pay them no attention and should hardly miss them if they cease to exist. Transcendental matters are, for most of us, always beyond the margin, because most of us have given up our whole consciousness to the occupation of the senses and permitted them to construct there a universe in which we are contented to remain. Only in certain occult and mystic states, in orison, O-R-I-S-O-N, contemplation, ecstasy, and their allied conditions, does the self contrive to turn out the usual tenets, shut the gateways of the flesh, that's a quote, gateways of the flesh, quote, and let those submerged powers which are capable of picking up messages from another plane of being have their turn. And she doesn't recommend a cult at all. She's just saying, I think she's saying it in a general term. She doesn't recommend the occult. Then it is the sensual world which retreats beyond the margin, and another landscape that rushes in. This other landscape rushes in. At last, then, we begin to see something of what contemplation does for its initiates. It is one of the many names applied to that chain of processes which have for their object this alteration of the mental equilibrium, the quote putting to sleep of that quote normal self, end quote, which usually wakes, and the awakening of that transcendental self, which usually sleeps. Shh, Leia. I really ought not to have my back on. There's nothing I have my back on. Like the woods are that way and this way. To man, meeting point of various stages of reality is given, though he seldom considers it, this unique power of choosing his universe. The extraordinary phenomenon known as double or disintegrated personality may perhaps give us a hint as to the mechanical nature of the change which contemplation effects. In this psychic malady, the total character of the patient, she's talking about what they used to call split personalities, now they call dissociative identity disorder. The person totally shifts. Sometimes they say their eye color changes, all their skill set changes, like people can play Rachmaninoff in one personality and not play the piano. They can speak a language in the other personality. One, I hope that they've learned, but anyway. I knew someone like that. I mean, I'm a psychologist, but anyway. So she said, perhaps we can look at this malady and give a hint to the mechanical nature of the change which contemplation effects in this psychic malady. The total character of the patient is split up. A certain group of qualities are, as it were, abstracted from the surface consciousness and so closely associated as to form in themselves a complete character or personality. Necessary pulls asunder from the character which this self usually shows to the world, since it consists exclusively of those elements which are omitted from it. Thus, in the classical case of Miss Beauchamp, the investigator, Dr. Morton Prince called three chief, quote, personalities from their ruling characteristics, quote, the saint, the woman, and the devil. The totality of character which composed the real Miss Beauchamp had split up into these mutually opposing types, each of which was excessive because withdrawn from the control of the rest. When voluntarily or involuntarily the personality which had possession of the field of consciousness was lulled to sleep, one of the others emerged. Hypnotism was one of the means which most easily affected this change. So sometimes people have had trauma, sometimes people have had trauma and they split into those different personalities. That's why they're formed, because of trauma, in order to survive in childhood. Hypnotism goes behind your subconscious. So I had one of my mentors that trained in it and then decided not to do it because he decided it goes behind your consciousness. Now, in the persons of mystical genius, the qualities which the stress of normal life tends to keep below the threshold of consciousness are of enormous strength. All right, I'm hearing animals. In these natural explorers of eternity, the transcendental faculty, the eye of the soul, is not merely present in embryo, but is highly developed and is combined with great emotional and volitional power. The result of the segregation of such qualities below the threshold of consciousness is to remove from them the friction of those counterbalancing traits in the surface mind which they might collide. They are the hiddenness, as Jacob Boehme would say. There they developed unchecked until a point is reached at which their strength is such that they break their bounds and emerge into the conscious field, either temporarily dominating the subject as in ecstasy, or permanently transmuting the old self as in the unitive life. The attainment of this point is accelerated by such processes as those of contemplation. These processes, not themselves mystical, but merely the mechanical conditions of mystical experience, are classed by psychologists with the states of dream and reverie and the condition loosely called hypnotic. In them, the normal surface consciousness is deliberately or involuntarily lulled, and images or faculties from beyond the threshold are able to take its place. All right, I'm going to, in there, it's page 69, which is very good, like the yin and the yang, because I do have the dog with me, and there are coyotes, and she's little. And I wish you so much love. Thanks for being here. Sorry we didn't get the whole 8 minutes. I had to start this over at the beginning. I won't even say what happened before. Much love. I love you guys so much. Share and comment, and hopefully the next time I'll do it in a more quiet or something more stable environment. Much love.